Now let's continue with the second part of capacity decision. It's called sales and operations planning. It is also called aggregate planning. This decision is about matching supply and demand over a medium term. Typically, this means around 12 months, although the exact horizon depends on the industry. In fast-moving industries, the horizon may be shorter, such as in high tech. Well, in more traditional industries, it can extend to 2 years, things like utilities. Okay? To see why this is necessary, imagine you are asked to increase the output by 25% next year. You cannot simply move forward without careful planning. You need to make sure the required resources are available. Do you have enough materials? Can your suppliers support this increase? Do you have enough workforce? Do you have sufficient working capital to support higher purchasing, production, and inventory levels? These are the types of questions that sales and operations planning is designed to address. Because these decisions are at high level, we focus on so-called aggregate demand rather than detailed product data. A company may produce many product families, each with multiple product models and variations. But at this stage, we simplify everything into a common unit. For example, a higher-end product might count as 1.7 generic units, while a lower-end product might count as 0.8 units. Differences like color of the product are ignored. Okay, so this allows us to represent demand, which actually be pretty complicated, right? To represent demand as a single number for each time period as we conduct this plan. Okay. On the supply side, the focus is on major resources such as workforce, materials, and working capital. The goal is to adjust both supply and demand so that they align, they match. If supply is insufficient, we look for ways to increase capacity or find alternative resources. If demand is too high or too uneven, we may try to shift or manage it. This process involves multiple functions within the organization, including marketing, finance, operations, and human resources. Each function has its own priorities. So the purpose of this S&OP process is to bring them together and reach a consensus plan that supports the company's overall goals and business strategies. At the same time, this planning must operate within certain constraints. Facility decisions, we just introduced it. Facility decisions, for example, are already fixed at this stage. So aggregate planning works within these limits, adjusting available options to achieve a balance between supply and demand over the planning horizon. This chart shows the different parties involved in sales and operations planning. As we can see, it is a cross-functional effort that requires input from multiple areas of the organization. Marketing, production, human resources, and finances all play a role, and each function has some flex. The key point, a new point on this page is each function has some flexibility in how it can contribute. Okay, it's not just something like this is what we want as an input. As an input, they can change more or less. Okay, so marketing can adjust how it drives demand. Production can change inventory and production plans. HR can consider options such as hiring temporary workers. All of these inputs, often with different priorities, need to be coordinated. In many cases, this involves internal negotiation. So this, as an OP process, as a cross-functional process, is not only so-called planning, it's a communication process. It's also a negotiation process, internal negotiation process. They try to arrive at a plan that balances supply and demand. The outcome is a consensus-based S&OP plan that reflects the combined perspectives from different functions. This plan also serves as a bridge. We are talking about here, this relationship. Also serve as a bridge to more detailed operational planning. At the S&OP level, everything is expressed in aggregate terms using generic units. But when we move towards execution, we need to translate those aggregate numbers into specific products, specific models, even specific colors of the product. Okay, this transition is called disaggregation. The aggregate planning is broken down into a rough cut production plan, which incorporates more detail. From there, the process continue into even more detailed planning, even lead to the day-to-day scheduling, which will be the content of the next chapter. Okay, so it's a bridge. It's a very important one. On this page, we use workforce management as an example to illustrate the options, because we talked about options last page, right? So what kind of options are available on both the demand side and the supply side? In aggregate planning, we focus on major resources such as workforce, materials, and working capital. And workforce is a good example because the options are relatively intuitive. For the other resources, you may need to consider a lot of technical situations. But for workforce, I mean, we are familiar with the options. Let's first look at the demand side. There are several ways to influence or shape demand. We can adjust the pricing, increase or decrease, advertisement or promotion, and use tools as backlog or reservation. Okay. So, for example, we may ask, if you do not have the inventory at this time, we may ask customers to wait for a later delivery date and offer some incentives so that their orders become part of the backlog, right? So you can also understand backlog as some kind of negative inventory, all right? We can also introduce seasonal products to either take advantage of peak demand periods or help fill gaps during slow periods. Overall, these are fairly universal tools used to increase, decrease, or smooth demand patterns. Okay, so for the demand, this kind of options is quite common. Okay, it's universal, no matter what resource we are planning. But on the supply side, the options are more resource specific. Since we are focusing on workforce management example, we can consider hire new employees, lay off workers. We can also increase output by using overtime, right? Although this is often limited by some labor regulation, you cannot increase the overtime indefinitely, right? So it's normally limited to a pretty low amount of hours. Another option is to bring in part-time or temporary workers, which is very common in industries with seasonal demand, such as retail during the holiday seasons. Think about Amazon. Their holiday period temporary employee make the company's total workforce 3 times larger. Okay. We can also use subcontracting, where part of the work is outsourced to other firms, although this is usually not a long-term solution. Each of these options come with different costs and trade-offs. Hiring and layoffs involve adjustment cost and disruptions. Overtime typically costs more per hour. Subcontracting includes the supplier's profit margins and may have quality issues, right? So while there are many ways to adjust the supply, they are not equally efficient or cost effective. It's situation dependent. These are the main options available, and they set the stage for understanding the real challenges in matching supply and demand. Okay, so now we are familiar with the options. Let's see what the game really requires. On this page, we introduce two fundamental strategies in aggregate planning, so-called level strategy and the chase strategy. To understand them, let's look at the chart on the right. Okay, so if demand were a flat line, this, then planning would be very simple. You just prepare your workforce. Let's still use workforce as an example. Just prepare the workforce very stable, very constant production rate to match such a flat demand. Not a big deal. And but in reality, demand usually fluctuate. And seasonality is also very common. Okay, so if demand is this case, that would be the challenge. Okay, so if this is a demand you have to meet, then let's now first consider what is the so-called level strength. In this approach, we keep the workforce and production rate stable over time, typically set at the average demand level. Okay, this creates a smooth and consistent production environment with stable jobs and no need for frequent hiring or layoffs. However, the trade-off is that we must use inventory to absorb demand fluctuation. Okay, let's say the 300, 600. Let's say the average demand is about 450 units, or let's say 500. Okay, to make it simple. You have up and down throughout the year, but the average monthly demand is 500. Therefore, you just prepare and hire and prepare a workforce which exactly meet this 500. Okay, but you also let them produce at stable speed. Okay, and therefore, at the end of the year, if backlog is allowed, definitely you will match the supply with the demand. But what is the cost? During the low demand period, which is this part and also this part, you produce more than need. Okay, so you because you produce that here, so therefore you create a lot of inventory. You need to hold those inventory. Okay, and here same thing. Well, the inventory will be depleted, will be deployed during the peak season. Okay, you still produce, but not enough. How to cover the gap? Use your inventory. Okay, in some cases, if there's a peak appear early, think about it, if it look like that, then you may have to, create a lot of backlog and then produce later, use later production to catch up with the earlier commitment. Okay, so that is the cost you have to pay. Okay, so that is a level strategy. In contrast, we can also implement a chase strategy. Well, in other words, we adjust at production level to match the demand in each period. Okay, so this means that workforce level or production effort change over time. And when demand is low, we scale down. Okay, when demand is high, we scale up. This can involve hiring and layoffs, but also alternatives like overtime and subcontracting. Okay, the advantage is that we minimize or even eliminate inventory. Since production closely follow the demand. This approach is also common in service setting because inventory is not available to help. Okay, each strategy has its advantage and disadvantage. The level strategy offers stability and potentially better quality because everything, no rush, everything is stable, but requires inventory and may involve holding or shortage cost. The chase strategy reduces inventory, but introduces operational challenges such as workforce adjustment, overtime, coordination with subcontractors. Okay? In practice, companies often use a hybrid approach. For part of the early year, maybe for this part, for example, no, let me go here. So, for example, in this part, let me do that. Okay. In reality, maybe for this earlier part, they implement a level strategy. Even if holding inventory, that's not a big deal. Okay, so they do this. And for here, the peak period, they really just start using a workforce to let them overtime work, which cover a little bit of here. And even for even higher, they rely on a little bit subcontracting, something like that. And then return to roughly a level strategy. Okay. So in reality, most likely it is a hybrid, or a combination of level for some periods and chase for some period. Okay, depending on the situation. Okay, so that's what happens. Talking about which strategies are more popular, it depends on industry, right? If your inventory is very expensive, like say high-tech inventory, not only the parts are expensive, but also the product evolves so fast. there is a very severe obsolescence issue, then you may rely on the chase strategy. Okay, well, for stable industries like the food industry or toilet paper production, level strategy is good enough. Okay, and also it depends on sometimes the talking about workforce management, it talks about feasibility of managing the workforce. Think about it for McDonald's. Each hour they have historical forecast. So each hour their level of employee is different. Okay, it's by scheduling. And so essentially they do a chase strategy. But on the other hand, if you are running a law firm or consulting company, you cannot really just hire and lay off employees that easily. So therefore, you pursue a level strategy. But obviously, you cannot really hire a lot of people and let them sit there idle, right? Therefore, for law firm, consulting companies, investment banking, the workforce is level strategy at the minimum level. But for the rest of them, they require overtime. So for those industries, it's very common to work 80 hours per week, right? As overtime. So it, different industries, different situations, maybe more, preferring different strategies, level or chase. Now let's use numerical examples to walk through a practical example to demonstrate the different strategy. Let's first demonstrate the level strategy. Okay, this table shows the aggregate planning process for a large firm. You may wonder, oh, a large firm, but such a simple firm? Yes. Okay, even though the firm is large, the table can still look relatively simple. Of course, a little bit larger than this one, but still relatively simple because we are working with aggregate generic units. Okay, no matter how complicated your number, your product is, it just show up as a generic number. Okay, it's a 300, something like that. Okay, so please note that uh, the same idea applies to the workforce as well. You may wonder, okay, there are so many different types of jobs. Okay, instead of tracking every job type, we use the concept of full-time equivalent employee. Okay, this allows us to combine different roles such as production, maintenance, administration into one comparable measure. Behind this, there are established models that can translate this aggregate number of so-called full-time equivalent employees into actual hiring plans with this many percent of engineer, that many percent of the supervisors, etc. Okay, but for planning purpose, we use this simplified representation. Now let's look at the data. We have 12 months. This is a planning for a year, right? Very typical aggregate planning. The sales forecast shows relative stable demand. Okay, but here, let's see, that's the forecast. It's not terrible, but we have what? We have a peak. We have a surging of demand in summertime, June, July, August. Okay, the total annual demand is 5,400. If we implement a level strategy, we aim to keep production constant. Okay. Therefore, how do we set up this level? It's easy. The annual demand is 5,400. I just also match with 5,400 and average into 12 months. That means each month we produce 450 units. Stable. Okay. If each worker produce 10 units, translate into this 10 units of capacity, then this translates into a stable workforce of 45 people. All right. And producing at steady rate of, 10 units per month and no overtime, no workforce change. But, this is the demand. Therefore, the difference have to be absorbed through inventory. In the early months, because the demand is so low, therefore I may have inventory. Okay, So this is the initial inventory. So actually, I always have 50 units of inventory in the system. I may carry it from the previous period, but I create 150 units of new inventory. So make the inventory of at the end of January 200 units. Okay, next month the same thing. So now I keep the 200 and it adds 150 more. So 350, etc., etc. Okay, but here you see the number fluctuate a little bit. I have 150 units more, but the demand is a little bit higher, so 50 is used, etc., etc. So this is the inventory, resulting inventory, and it's fortunate for us is for this simple situation, even during the peak time, there is no backlog. Okay, sometimes backlogging will appear, all right? So now you have this plan. This is your decision, okay? And this decides your capacity, and this is the resulting inventory situation. And from past experience, you have the cost data. The regular production, what's the cost of them? There is no overtime, no new hire or layoff, and inventory carrying cost is this. You can calculate the total and the total cost is 2,548. Okay, so that will be our focus. Okay, we change different alternatives, try to seek, a solution that reduces total cost. All right, but this is for level strategy. Now let us take a look at the chase strategy example. All right. So the demand pattern is exactly the same as before. Oh, sorry, here. It's this row is exactly the same as before, so 5,400. But talking about strategy, since we choose level, so the production will be here, 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 here. Okay, and here we do have a little bit. You can see the level the inventory policy. This make this planning pretty practical. We just keep 50 units of inventory just as safety buffer, just in case something like machine breakdown or something. Okay, so that is our buffer. It's always there. We do not deliberately increase it or decrease it. Okay, so we just try to produce this. Well, then, for example, in this kind of months, the forecast is a little bit different from because each employee, regular production can produce 10 units. Okay. So it's if we hire 48 people, we will just produce for 80. Okay. And similar here. So those fluctuation is absorbed. Okay. So this is the chase strategy. You can see your regular workers, the number keeps changing. Okay, roughly follow the same pattern. Well, that's your action plan. Now you can start calculating its total cost. The regular production, whatever cost. Well, here it involves a lot of hire and layoff, which cost you a lot of money. Okay, so it's right here. Inventory is still there, but you can see it's pretty low. It's almost like a constant low number, and therefore inventory will be here. And you sum up the total for this solution, the chase strategy gives you a little bit lower cost, right? 2527, 2548, 2527 is a little bit lower. Okay, so is that our final answer? No, and I'm just trying to demonstrate two pure strategy with this numerical example. There are other possibilities, right? You can actually you can do a little bit of let's say hiring 40 people for this period, and let's say using the overtime a little bit here, and you can save hugely. Maybe you just maintain the, let me see what's the number last period. Last time you need 45 people. So now, how about you just maintain 40 people of stable workforce and run some stable production in those earlier periods? You'll still accumulate inventory, but not too bad. Okay. And then during these 3 months, how about you use a 40 employee because it's not so far away. Let them run overtime at full capacity. Okay. And you will have such a cost item. Furthermore, you may consider even, with the overtime, maybe in July, you can still not cover the gap. Okay, so in that month, maybe you, just hire a subcontractor to produce a little bit for you to cover just that 1 month of gap and not in huge quantity. Okay, so then you can evaluate the cost of that solution, and normally I would guess intuitively the total cost can be even lower. You just need to balance all the cost, right? You are given the whole set of costs. Just try to trial and error and try to reduce it, or use optimization method to just look for the optimum answer. Okay. And however, one last thing to remember, all this discussion so far, chase and level, we are talking about what can we do on the supply side. Do not forget, something can be done on the demand side too, right? So if the real reason for this summer big peak is some kind of promotional campaign, then you can talk to marketing or even higher level of executive to see, can we replace one big sale during the summer into two medium size, promotion in other time of the year, such that the demand, instead of this big peak, which is troublesome, into something like, yeah, a little bit it's quite stable. In that case, it's much easier to match the supply and demand. Supply and demand can be matched even better and more cost effectively. Normally, if the demand side is flexible, can accept changes, this total improvement is even bigger. Okay, so that is the example.